Newcastle United are finally back in the Champions League for the first time in 20 years. The Magpies kick off their first game of Group F, or the Group of Death as it's being named, on Tuesday night away at AC Milan. But how far into the tournament can they go? Can the 8 favourites win the lot? Well, probably not, but let's talk about their chances in the tournament. Not since the 2003-04 season have Newcastle qualified for the Champions League. So how did they get on that occasion? Well, not so good. They didn't reach the group stages after being knocked out in the third qualifying round by Partizan Belgrade. The tie was 1-1 on aggregate, but Newcastle lost the home leg 1-0 and then lost 4-3 on penalties. The season before that, 2002-2003, they got to the group stage, and they qualified from the group, finishing second, but they gave themselves a huge hill to climb up after losing their first 3 games. But after winning their next 3 games, they kept their Champions League hopes alive. Back in 2002, there were 2 group stages in the Champions League. In the next group stage, Newcastle found themselves with Barcelona, Inter Milan and Bayer Leverkusen for company. But unfortunately, this time it didn't go so well. Their wins against Leverkusen and draw away at Inter Milan weren't enough to see them through. This would mark the last time that Newcastle would play in the Champions League group stages for 21 years. But it's not the last time they played European football. A 5th place finish in the Premier League in 2011-12 saw Newcastle qualify for the Europa League in 2012-13. They reached the quarterfinals, but they were then knocked out by Benfica. Newcastle managed an impressive 4th place finish last season, just 1 season after facing the very real threat of relegation in 21-22, before Mike Ashley finally cleared off and Eddie Howe came in to save the day. Now they're back in the Champions League and they're ready for European glory. Who will stand in their way? Well, just a couple of half-decent teams called PSG, Borussia Dortmund and AC Milan. Of course, all teams who have reached the Champions League final at least once in the past 16 years. Yep, so looking at all of the groups, Group F is undoubtedly the hardest, and it's being dubbed the Group of Death for good reason. So is that it for Newcastle? Better luck next time? Well, no, I'm not sure it is. If anything, I think the draw might be a good thing. Hear me out. In my opinion, drawing some tough opponents actually makes Newcastle exactly what they have been in the Premier League for the last 2 seasons, and that's the underdogs. This can allow them to continue turning up, underestimated, and coming away with results. So let's have a look at their opponents. How did they get on in the Champions League last year? What did they do in their own leagues? How have their summers been? Starting off with PSG. PSG finished second in Group H behind Benfica in the Champions League last year, both on 14 points. They then crashed out in the round of 16, losing 3-0 to Bayern Munich on aggregate. That's 2 seasons in a row they couldn't push any further, despite making the final the season before. Of course, they won League 1, but they didn't run away with it last season. Lens actually finished 1 point behind them. They also won the Trophée des Champions, the French equivalent of the Community Shield. Now, there's been a lot of change over the summer. Manager Christophe Gaultier departed 1 year into a 2-year contract, and he was replaced by Luis Enrique. There's been a number of player arrivals too, the most notable being Ousmane Dembele from Barcelona, and there's been just as many departures, with Neymar Jr. and Messi both leaving Paris for pastures new. These are huge losses for a PSG side that still have yet to win a Champions League trophy. And of course, there is the ongoing saga of Mbappe's future. He made it clear over the summer that he has no intentions of extending his contract, and it's looking very likely he's going to be on his way next summer. I don't think drawing in the French president is going to work this time. And as this season started, that did impact them on the pitch. Mbappe was absent for their first match, which they drew, and at the time of recording, they currently sit second, 2 points behind Monaco. Borussia Dortmund also finished second in their group, Group G, behind Man City with 9 points. They too would fall at the round of 16, losing 2-1 to Chelsea on aggregate, despite winning the first game. In the Bundesliga, Dortmund matched Bayern blow for blow all season, but a draw on the final day meant that they drew level on points with them and missed out on a league trophy on goal difference. In terms of the summer transfer window, the headline move was the departure of Jude Bellingham to Real Madrid for a whopping €103 million. He was their top scorer in all competitions last season, and he's going to be a huge miss. At the time of recording, they've won just 1 of their opening 3 games. And finally, AC Milan. If we're talking last year's Champions League alone, this could be Newcastle's toughest opponent. Coincidentally, they also finished second in Group E with 10 points, 3 points behind Chelsea. But they would make it the furthest of the 3, dispatching Spurs and Napoli before losing 3-0 to their city rivals Inter in the semi-finals. In Serie A, they finished 4th. They also lost another final to Inter Milan, the Supercoppa Italiana. It's been a busy summer for Stefano Pioli's side. 10 plus incomings with the likes of Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Christian Pulisic arriving in Italy. There were just as many outgoings, and 1 arrival in Newcastle upon Tyne itself. Sandro Tonali left AC Milan for €70 million, a huge signing for Newcastle that might just be the sign of the type of arrivals to come in the future under their new owners. AC Milan are currently second in Serie A at the time of recording, joint on 9 points with Inter with 3 successive league wins. Newcastle undoubtedly have a formidable set of opponents in Group F, and ones with plenty of European football under their belt. But there has been a lot of upheaval for all of these teams this summer. They all finished second in their groups, and aside from Milan, fell at the first hurdle off after the group stages. So what about Newcastle themselves? Their fans have been in dreamland since Eddie Howe's arrival. In 21-22, relegation to the Championship looked like an almost certain reality. They didn't win any of their opening 14 games in the Premier League that season. But when Mike Ashley finally sold the club to a Saudi consortium in October 2021, their fortunes started to change. But no Newcastle fan could imagine quite how well it was going to go. Steve Bruce left Newcastle by mutual consent just 3 days later and was quickly succeeded by Eddie Howe. Now, Eddie Howe had left AC Bournemouth 1 year earlier and had been quietly waiting for his next opportunity. His 2 spells at Bournemouth were hugely successful, overseeing promotion from League 2, League 1, a Championship title, and 5 years in the Premier League. His time at Bournemouth ended with the club's relegation back to the Championship in 2020. Now, he had a big task on his hands saving Newcastle from relegation. In fact, in his first 9 games, they picked up just 1 win, a tightly fought 1-0 at home to Burnley. But it all changed from 27th of December 2021. For the next 9 games, Newcastle wouldn't lose a league match, winning 6 and drawing 3. Howe would guide Newcastle to an 11th place finish after winning 12 of their final 18 Premier League games. This made them the first Premier League team to ever survive relegation after not winning any of their first 14. So what changed? Well, a number of inspired January signings via newly acquired funds from their change in ownership injected life into a struggling team. Kieran Trippier, Chris Wood, Bruno Guimaraes and Dan Burn joined for a collective £90 million and all had an almost instant impact. Howe also started to get the best out of existing players at the club. Importantly, Burn and Trippier helped to tighten up an incredibly leaky defence. Before January, Newcastle had conceded 43 goals. From January 2022, they let in just 20. Now, it's easy to say that Newcastle bought their way out of trouble. A lot of people thought that, but the success is undoubtedly down to Howe's management. The 4 players they signed were not glitzy additions, and £90 million for 4 players in today's market somehow just isn't that much for a Premier League side anymore. Many thought that there was no way this incredible run would continue in 22-23, and if it did, it would probably be because they've signed a load of superstars with their new pot of money. There's no way this would carry on. Well, this was wrong on many counts. For starters, the transfer business. Newcastle did spend bigger in the summer of 2022, somewhere in the region of 120 million, but for 10 players. And they didn't spend that money on a bunch of Neymar juniors. They brought in a blend of experienced Premier League players like Nick Pope and Matt Targett. The bigger money was spent on significant upgrades in both boxes. Sven Botman joined for 35 million from Lille and Alexander Isak from Real Sociedad for 63 million pounds. And when the season started, that impressive run from the previous season continued. Newcastle lost just one of their first 23 league matches. In fact, all season they lost just 5 league matches. The addition of Pope and Botman created an absolutely masterful defence, one that conceded just 33 goals all season, the joint best defensive record with league winners Man City. Amazingly, Newcastle have kept just 2 clean sheets in their last 22 league games and still managed that incredible defensive record. Callum Wilson scored 18 goals in all competitions, which was the highest total of any Newcastle player since Andy Carroll in 09-10. Their form wasn't just limited to the league either. Eddie Howe guided Newcastle to the EFL Cup final, their first in over 23 years, but they lost 2-0 to Man United. And that takes us up to this season. They couldn't do it again, could they? Well, by this point, I think it would be silly to underestimate Eddie Howe's Newcastle. They've been playing excellent football for 18 months and are looking to keep building. Howe has a 48% win rate. They made some great additions again in the summer as they prep for their return to the Champions League. Harvey Barnes, Livramento, Sandro Tonali. That's without mentioning the January signing of Anthony Gordon, who's starting to come good. But of course, Newcastle haven't started very well in the Premier League this season. They've won just 1 and lost 3 league games at the time of recording. That's a far cry from their defensive record last season. They have played Liverpool and City in their opening 4 though, and thumped Villa 5-1 on the first day of the season, so I wouldn't say that all hope is lost. The City match itself was a tight 1-0 loss, and Liverpool a tight 2-1 at home after a late Darwin Núñez brace. A good team doesn't become a bad team overnight. The international break will have given Eddie Howe time to work out what's gone wrong. So back to that original question, how far can they go in the Champions League? I ran a poll on X, 50% of people think they'll go out of the group stages, 28% the round of 16. For me, looking at the group stages, I'm putting them second behind AC Milan. They're the underdog and that suits them just fine. If anything, their poor start in the league will have other teams underestimating them further. They managed the cup final last year. The calibre of team is going to be a little bit different to the EFL Cup. They know what it takes to put that kind of run together. AC Milan are the biggest threat. They know what it takes to get to the semi-finals, and despite losing Tonali, they've kept the same manager and made some good additions over the summer. PSG, I think they're going to struggle again. There's no Neymar, there's no Messi. They've struggled in the last 2 Champions Leagues, and they've already dropped points in the league. Dembele aside, the signings haven't been particularly inspiring. Dortmund know their way out of the group stages, but Bellingham is a huge loss. If Newcastle do progress to the round of 16, they'll be playing the winners and runners-up of each other group. And here's my predictions of who I think could be left from the others. Now, I might be over-optimistic here, but I genuinely think Newcastle can give give half of these teams a game, so it's 50-50 at the round of 16. For a bit of fun, I'm predicting the quarterfinals for Newcastle, which would be an impressive feat after a 20-year absence from the Champions League, and especially given where they were 2 years ago. Let's see how that ages. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider checking out some of my other content. If you like what you see, then please subscribe. If you've got any burning thoughts or predictions about Newcastle yourself, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!